year. 2001 maybe.
Okay, I think it automatically records, but I'm going to minimize this. Hang on. You do not need to see me. Stop my video. Folks, can you hear us okay? Just give us a thumbs up. I assume you can, unless I hear differently. All right. I am going to go ahead and welcome Sue Fletcher. Sue is a master gardener since 2001. Would that be correct? And part of your biography is that you did work for Lincoln University. Is that correct? Just presented for Lincoln University as a landscape expert. And Sue's going to talk about home landscaping first. And so with that, I'm just going to go ahead and say, Sue, take it away.
Number one, yourself. Number two, your garden. But I would like to encourage you, and you might have to speak up and I might have to repeat your questions, but I would like for this to be interactive, because it's going to be a very boring 2.5 hours or however long it is if I sit up here and talk the whole time. So if you have questions, if you have comments, we've got a lot of experts in the room here, and I know you all are probably really more of an expert than you realize you are. So ask your questions, make your comments, and let's be a little interactive here. Like I say, my name is Sue Fletcher. I have a courtyard garden. I live in a villa, and my garden is probably about twice the size of this room. My garden is about 20 years old, and it looks completely different today than it did 20 years ago, for two reasons. One, I got old, and I just couldn't take care of the garden the way I used to. And number two, I really came to the understanding that deer will destroy your garden. And so you're going to throw away all your money trying to plant things that you really want, but that the deer like. So once I really came to that understanding, and those two things, my garden is very different than it was 20 years ago, but that's okay. I think that's the way gardens are. They change over time. So let's start with you now. If you'll tell me your name and tell me a little bit about your garden, how old it is. And my garden used to be what I would call more of an English country garden, and it's probably not quite so much now as it used to be. Kind of tell me your theme of your garden.
I'm NP. I just purchased the house here, so I've inherited someone else's garden.
Wow, what fun!
I guess it's more landscaping than actual garden. There's roses around and irises. I saw those when I was viewing the house before everything closed and I moved.
Did that make a difference in your purchasing of the house?
No, I don't think it influenced me. There's forsythia, I think, in crepe myrtle. There's some things that are there. Gorgeous azaleas. But my goal is to be a more productive type of gardener than a decorative type of gardener. So the things that she has that are in good shape, I'll take care of. But I don't see me saying I have a cottage garden, because like I said, I'm going to be more of a productive garden with trees and vegetables.
Okay, good. Your name?
Marina. I moved permanently down here 4 years ago. We live on a very steep hillside.
Oh, well, welcome to the lake.
Yeah, and so the challenge for me has been keeping whatever soil and digging with a pickaxe the holes.
Where did you move from?
Iowa.
Yeah, I could tell when she started describing, people that come from Iowa have this gorgeous fertile soil, farmland, and they come down here to them Ozark Hills that are filled with rocks and clay.
We
Yeah,
lived in the country up there, so the deer stayed out in the cornfields and never bothered, except maybe tulips, every once in a while, never bothered things. So as you had said, the deer have definitely been a challenge, but most of my gardens are all, and they're not pretty fences because I can't afford that, but they're the wire fencing on ready rebar wrapped around bushes and everything else that I've tried to do. So everything is,
so we'll talk about that a little more later. So you have some things that you've put in place to try to deal with the deer.
and I try to as much because of being in the garden club that promotes it too, and a lot of native plantings, pollinator type varieties is what I'm working.
Good.
Establish.
Great. And that, you know, for this soil, that's probably your best idea for sure. Gentlemen, you have one gentleman. We always have one gentleman in the group.
My name is Joe. I currently have a live in I have some container-raised tomatoes, which we review. I just have a hard time bringing them to, they don't like them. So I have to let them and just let them.
Okay, so you're an apartment gardener, you have a balcony garden.
No, it's actually a duplex, but there's not a lot of soil.
Yeah,
So
okay. Good.
I do work with a lot of other relatives and things like that.
That's good. Good. Yes. Yes.
I'm Lauren. I have a vegetable garden, porch. I've only been here a year, so.
And where did you come from? Okay. Okay.
Plants inside. So.
Where is this class? How many classes have you all had, Winnie? Is this like second class? Okay, all right. So you know we're going to get into fruit trees and vegetables and all that kind of stuff.
And Dad made it look easy, so it really work. But I'm learning. I have my first vegetable garden finally. I did container potting and all of that. We didn't have a lot of sun, and then that was an issue. And so now I have a fenced-in covered area that we built that's about 10 by 10. So I have tomato plants and vegetable plants and things. Not big enough, obviously, so it's never big enough. It's too big. But I have a lot of rocks, so I made a rock garden and a hill of rocks that I did all by hand, and then I did layers down the hill because it was eroding, and I put in iris and all kinds of things. So I have like 5 different levels in my fairy garden. So, you know, I work on that. But yeah.
I'm Andrea, and fairly new to gardening. I haven't really done much my whole life other than a few pretty little plants in the front porch. But and I'm from Kansas City, so I live in Kansas City. We have a lake house here in Sunrise Beach. And since we've all, I've gone virtual with my company, I've been down here working from the lake. So much more relaxing, but there was a lot of anxiety when we first started working from home and trying to figure that out, worried about your family. Gardening has put me in a zone. And so on Mother's Day weekend, I spent way too much money, but I just didn't even look at the cost until I got to the check register. But I'm like, I don't care, I'm gonna go. So I have about a space that's about 10 by 12 that I've created all stuff that the deer don't like, because we have huge families that roam the neighborhood.
Yes.
Sometimes you'll see 15 of them in your backyard. And so I've just kind of been dabbling with it. And, you know, it was just kind of a stress reliever. So I'd like to do more with herbs and maybe some vegetables.
Deer don't like herbs. Herbs are.
They don't like herbs?
No.
That's good to know. I have a really ginormous decking system off the back of my lakeside on the house. So I'm trying to figure out what I can do that's up like that the deer wouldn't come up on them.
No, we're going to talk a lot about different types of flowers, so you might get some ideas, and that's where, you know, some of you all who've been gardening for a while can throw in ideas of, you know, what you could do here and what you could do there. Well, that's all good, and
And the only reason I turned that around
Oh.
was because one of the girls said she couldn't hear.
Okay.
But that, you know what, there's not much we can do about that.
no.
And okay, so you did get to minimize, and all you really need to do, if you want to, I'm gonna move that.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you
There.
want to let the people on Zoom tell them about their gardens?
Can you all hear me?
We have to.
Are they muted?
No, well, it's up to them that they can unmute. Let me just do the participants. All right, so we will unmute. So Kathy, if you can hear me, I hope I'm trying to unmute you. Unmute.
Yes, I can hear you. I can
Kathy,
hear.
would you like to talk about yourself for our speaker, Sue?
Just tell
I'll just tell you that I have a massive amount of landscaping that was put in by some professionals, and I'm doing my best to keep it going. So I have a lot of roses I've got, and then I have a very tiny herb garden and some tomatoes and that sort of thing. But things like crepe myrtles and spirea and boxwoods and all kinds of stuff. So I'm just trying to keep it going.
It sounds like you have a pretty formal garden. If you've got
I
all
do.
the- Yeah. Okay, good, good. Is there another person on here?
Yeah, and Leslie is next. Leslie, would you like to talk about yourself?
I have container gardens because I moved here about 2-3 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Okay,
And it's vegetables
okay.
and herbs.
Thank you. And then I'll unmute Lisa. If I can get her to unmute. I don't know if I can. I've got her camera. There you, sorry.
Unmute. There we go. Okay. I've lived in this home for 20 years and we barely did any landscaping because of, it's the Ozarks. But I do have containers on the deck, mainly with ferns. I do have a fig tree that I got this year. I found it on sale. I've got one little tiny fig on it. It's kind of fun. Lemongrass, some annuals and stuff. But out at the farm, which is on the other side of Eldon, we have 3 separate areas. One is, I call it the kid garden. I've made a big hoop that's got birdhouse gourds and Chinese noodle beans and snake gourds covering it. There's zinnias in there, I forget how many, okra. I planted like a whole flat of rosemary, a whole flat of lavender. They're all doing pretty good. My helichrysum, I don't know what happened to it, but it's right in the middle of stuff, and something like covered it, but didn't affect anything else. In the other bed, that's probably, it's probably 30 by 30. We filled in an old milking barn foundation. So it's kind of a raised bed without really being raised. It's more like contained in the ground. We have it all fenced off. Everything's fenced off out there because of deer. And in there, we've got like 44 tomato plants, 42 purple green bean plants. I've got pole beans. My cucumbers are going crazy, so we're getting ready to have a pickle fest here in the next week. My green peppers are like doing terrible. I started from almost everything from seed.
Do you have a greenhouse? Do you have a greenhouse?
No, but that's on the list. And if I don't have one next year, we're going to have a big argument. But no, that is on the list to do. But so we've got watermelon, so we're just taking as good a care of everything as we can. Grateful for today's rain. So
we have all kinds of gardens here.
Yeah.
We have from a few pots on a deck to a pretty extensive garden, it sounds like. And that's what's kind of neat about networking with other gardeners, is you really can get ideas and dream a little and learn new things. I'll just do that.
Fair enough.
Can I do that?
Yes, of course.
Why isn't it doing it
I
then?
don't know. Let's try it again. Let's put it down.
Might be frozen.
It might be. Let's see here. We'll just wake it up.
We'll get rolling here pretty soon.
Yep. That's what we have to do. And Leslie says she also does container gardening.
Okay.
Okay. There, let's get it.
Okay.
Okay. So you could just tap.
Tap. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I can't go back.
When we go back, it's here.
I can just do here. I
All
think.
right.
Yeah, you just kind of stay closer to me. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is what adds value to your home. And there's no doubt that landscaping does. Now, I was interested because you said you moved into a garden, an area that already had a garden. When we sold our lake home, I don't live on the lake now, but when we sold our lake home, I had put a lot of work into landscaping on the side of a hill. And the people really, they were out of St. Louis. They were not going to be here full time. So that was a red flag, number one. But they really said one of the reasons they wanted to buy the house was because of the landscaping. So they bought the house, and you know how you go back and look, have you ever done that? You go back and look where you lived at one time. I was just devastated because they didn't take care of anything. Now they're not here full time, and you know, you have to be here full time to take care of a garden. They were very unrealistic. But there's no doubt that it sold the house. And so I just have to let go of that and be okay with it.
I
But
have a good vegetable garden, and I grew up during cats, and it looks like, I can't tell you what
I know. It's sad.
And even just the mowing, she's not even keeping up with it. Maybe she should have stayed in the apartment.
Well, you know, this is sort of off the subject, but you know, if you're coming to the lake to live, it's one thing. If you're coming to the lake to play, you best not buy a home with a lot of gardening. I mean, you can't play and work in a garden and you're only here part-time. I mean, that's just the way it is. But anyway, basically what they're saying that landscaping can add as much as 50%, 10 to 15% to the value of your home. And I believe that, you know, and of course, it also can cause people to not want to be in a certain place. Now, I live, again, in a villa, and whoever comes, and when I put my house on the market, they're going to have to be a gardener because, you know, if they're not going to want to buy that house. So it can go both ways, but there's no doubt it does add to the value of your home. I think when you're landscaping, as you move, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, but most of the time, although it sounds like we have one person that has, you know, a pretty in-depth, long-lived landscaping plan in place, but most of us, as we begin to think about landscaping our property, we'll do it in phases. And usually you do the phase that sometimes faces the street or that people see. Sometimes you do the phase where you're going to spend the most time. But one of the things you have to remember is to plan landscaping for the entire house. You know, the front, the back, and it's very strange on the lake because your back is your front, right? And the sides. In other words, you want to plan for landscaping all around the house. This is an example of, you know, landscaping around the side of a house. And what you do when you do this is you really create a unified landscaping throughout the whole house. But sometimes, particularly if you buy a new home where there's no landscaping, most people can't go in and create a landscaping plan for the whole house immediately. Number one, they just don't have the time, and number two, they don't have the money. There's no doubt, as you found when you went to buy flowers. We're going to talk a little bit about planning, but you know, you need a budget, and there's ways to work around that. Obviously, using seeds, friends who are willing to give you cuttings and stuff, but still, it costs money to garden. There's just no doubt about that. So landscape design is defined as organizing and enriching outdoor space through the placement of plants and structures in an agreeable, useful relationship with the natural environment.
including deer?
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not. Designing landscapes is really an art. Now, my background, I have a lot of art in my background. I'm a painter and a fiber artist. And I think of landscaping as a lot like painting, except you're painting with flowers, and we're going to talk a little bit about use of color and things like that. But there is an art to landscaping. And so if you have a place that you're proud of, then be proud of the art that you've created. It's not merely planting of trees and shrubs. It's making the best use of the available space in the most attractive way. And it involves selecting and growing plants that best fit the design. You really need to, how many of you have a plan, a drawn out plan, landscape plan? You do, good for you. You do, good for you, great. Well, I encourage you to do that. Now, some people, if you get on and read too much about this, they want you to graft it out according to, actual size and all this kind of stuff. And all you need is a piece of paper and just start drawing out your plan. We're going to talk about preparing a landscape plan. We're going to talk about what plants to use. We're going to talk about some principles of design, some basic plant elements, talk about arranging plants, plant selection. So when we're talking about landscape design, basically what you want to do is just take a piece of paper and draw your home in the center, okay? And from that point on, you want to first draw in everything that's there that's not a plant. If you have a utility pole, if you have trees, if you have outbuildings, if you have utility lines and you know where they are, you need to put those in. If you have fences, if you have septic tanks, any of those structures that you might have, you need to draw those in already. Air conditioners, porches, decks, any of that, because you're going to have to decide and take that into account when you're choosing plants and when you're creating your landscape design. Drains, mailboxes, anything like that that's a hardscape that's already there. Be sure and draw that in. Now, the experts will tell you to draw it to scale. Don't worry about that. You don't really have to do that. I mean, if you want to, and that's your thing, but don't let that keep you from drawing out a landscape plan. Then it's time to dream. Then, well, I go back a little bit. If you already have plants in place, trees that you want to keep, go on and draw those in. Now, like you moved and you're going to keep some things, and sometimes for various reasons you don't want to keep them or you want to move them, but you need to go on and draw that in. And then you begin to put in your proposed trees and bushes and flower beds and etc. And you really need to think, if you do have a theme, you need to think about that. Anybody here have a southwestern theme garden? Cactus, a lot of succulents, things like that. You have a little bit of that? Yeah. Yeah. Right. You've got formal gardens. The one gal that was talking said she had a lot of boxwood. That tells me if you have a lot of boxwood, you have a pretty formal garden, because that's typical of a pretty formal garden. You can have an informal garden to the point of kind of an English country garden where it's just sort of, really informal. Or you can have a little more formal, which would be, more like a little cottage garden or something. You can have natives, like I've been to Joanne's house. She's got Wonderful
You have
garden.
chaotic natives like an English country garden.
Yeah, which is a lovely garden, natives. But anyway, you need to sort of think what your garden theme is going to be. Because if you don't have a theme and a plan, you get mishmash. What you do is you go to the store like you did in the spring, and it all looks wonderful. And you've waited all winter and you buy everything you can get your hands on. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you wind up with mishmash. You know, you come back and stuff doesn't go together, and I don't know. You know, so you're better off, two things: go with a list and know what you want to buy, and have your plan in place. There are software programs out there. You can buy one, but there are some free on the net that'll help you with garden design. Better Homes and Gardens has one. If you go to Better Homes and Gardens Landscape Design, they used to at least have a free program. It's not wonderful, but it does let you draw on there and, you know, create a, you know, put things in there. So if you're a techie person and you want it online, you can do that. But, you know, pencil and paper is always good. And the other great thing about a landscape design and a garden journal, which we're going to talk about next, is if you move, you can pass that on to the next person. And they know, if they're buying in the middle of the winter, they know what's there, what's already been planted. Otherwise, you got to wait a year until all of that starts coming up to see what you even have. So that's another reason it's nice to, you know, if you know you're probably not going to be in your place forever and you're still trying to, you're putting a garden together, keep your plan, date it, because you're going to probably add to it over time, and keep your garden journal, which we'll talk about in just a minute. You can pay somebody. There's a lot of people around here that'll come in and give you an assessment of your place and tell you for a price what to do. Sometimes if you have them come in and then you buy the plants from them and you do it yourself, sometimes they'll give you a little break, you know, on buying, and they'll tend more to guarantee. If you buy from them, you know, they'll tend more to guarantee the plants that you buy. But putting a very complex landscape design together with perhaps a water feature, you better be prepared. I mean, you know, it's up to you. You got the bucks, go for it. It's gonna, you know, it's gonna cost you quite a bit of money. But the other thing about doing that is most of the time they will come in and walk through and give you ideas. And then you're like most of us here, is that you implement those over time. You know, maybe the first year you're just gonna do nothing but put down pea gravel or rock or mulch or whatever. And then the next year you're gonna start doing this and this and this. So, you know, gardening is over time. I mean, very few people, unless you walk into a garden that's already in place, have the garden they want from the get-go. It just happens over time. And like I say, if you do put a landscape plan together, it can be implemented as time and money allow. And many times, if you're still working, the time that you can put into not only gardening, but things like watering. I found out I was spending 2 hours every night after I'd already worked 10 or 12 hours watering. You know, that's not a lot of fun. Now you can maybe put in, you know, drip systems and etc. But what are you willing to do? You know, how much time, and be realistic about it. How much time do I really have to take care of this that I'm putting in place? And with vegetable gardening, I mean, how much time do you have to do preparing, you know, taking care of your, what you reap, what you sow? You know, you've got to talk about canning, freezing, preparing, right? So that's way too much work for me, but if it's your thing, that's great. And fruits the same way, you know, you have to take into account how much time that you have that you want to put into that. So this is an example of a typical landscape design. As you can see, they show, you know, all the things that we've been talking about. If you have easements, that's another thing you really have to watch. The lake is super bad about property lines. And if you've ever sold a house down here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you think it's yours, and then that you sell your place and you have it surveyed and it isn't yours at all. So that is pretty typical of the lake. So be real sure, you know, that you're gardening on your own land. And like I say, and I would date this because you're going to add to it or detract from it probably as the years go by. Plus, it's fun to do, I think. This again shows over time how this person has enlarged and made their garden place much more sophisticated. As far as garden journals, how many keep a journal? Do you get a journal? Do you still give a journal? Oh, they all have a journal. Well, of course, that's a type of journal. Well, you know, journals are journals. I'm not journaling as much as I used to for gardens, but you know, this is what's called an altered journal, and I just took a book of poetry, and then I'll let you look through it. Just added different things. An old journal, April 21st, 2013. Planted 3 roses. The lilacs are blooming. You know, just make notations. What's blooming and when? Because how often do you sit in the spring and think, how much longer to the lilacs? When did they bloom last year? When did the azalea bloom last year? You know, if you write that down, just in a little whatever, you know that. You know that sometimes. And I do a lot of pressed flowers. So I'm going to pass these around. These are all kinds of journals that I've done. This one is another time, like talking about 417, the first finch. You know, don't you get excited when you have the first finch, first hummingbird, etc. So putting up finch feeders. Little things like that I put in my journals. And this one is more of a nature journal. And we spend our winters in Florida. So some of this is Florida things that we see when we're down in Florida. Anyway, another type of journal. The journaling is really, I think, a part of gardening that speaks to the creativity of gardening. And this is a book, and I'm sure you can buy this on Amazon, and it's professionally done. It's called The Painted Garden. It's a mutual friend of ours. This is a lovely book, and it kind of gives you an idea of another ways to journal, and I really kind of but anyway, think about journaling, and I don't know. Now, if I were using this book,
I encourage them to make copies of some of those sheets and put it in a notebook. Because the original
Right.
ladies that developed that intended for it to have holes punched and copies made into a binder.
You know,
And
I would put, if I were using this, I'd punch holes in it, I'd put it in a binder, and I would put pressed flowers, I put pictures, like the seed packets, I would put in there, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because that reminds you, one of the biggest things is you have 3 different clematis. Now, which one do I trim and which one in the spring and which one do I leave alone? Can't remember.
I insert all of my tags on the plants. Sometimes I look back and think, oh, I didn't like that location, and then I'll look back when I didn't pay attention to the tag. Put in
Exactly.
afternoon sun, and then
Exactly.
somebody else came and said, oh, I love that. What is it?
Yeah.
I tell them, well, they took their phone and took a picture of the
Yeah.
tag so they could go to their nursery.
Yeah, tags are a good thing to put in here. Or you can't remember when to prune it. Or does it, and you know, sometimes you plant something that takes sun and 5-10 years later, it's in a shady place. You can't figure out why it's not growing. Well, it needs to be moved to the sun. So you can look back and you can, that gives you a history there. So, you know, good, I think you good for me, I would sort of enhance it a little bit with a little more creativity, but. Uh-oh, we might have gone to sleep.
Technical problem.
No, it's not the best. Sometimes it should work without the internet, so that shouldn't be an issue. It's okay, don't be afraid.
I think I went to sleep.
And so down here is where, and it's almost invisible down here. is
That
where
means I
the-
have to put my glasses on.
Uh,
Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
see, they're I wish they were more visible, but is that where you want to go?
Yes, that's
Good.
fine. Okay, the other thing in this, as you're designing your garden, is how you want people to kind of move through it. Not only people, but if you've got animals, how you kind of want your animals to move through your garden. So, and usually you do that with walkways, flagstone, but maybe just mulch paths, things like that, because you really need to guide people through your garden. And they will, I don't know, unfortunately, we didn't have a garden tour this year, but I really, really, really encourage you to go on garden tours. And you need to look at things that we're talking about as we go through this class. But one of the things is, how are they guiding people through their gardens? Paths, stonework, placement of plants. All of those guide people through the garden. You also need to consider when designing your garden, how you can modify the environment. And you really can, and I think this is particularly important if you're living in a more country area versus the more city area. But you basically, by planting particularly evergreen trees, but even other kinds of trees, you can really use them as a wind buffer. And I mean, all of us remember, well, that's probably not true, you all are so the same, but I remember my husband and I were having this conversation. It was 95 degrees yesterday when we didn't have air conditioning. Now, some of y'all don't remember when you didn't have air conditioning, but I remember when we didn't have air conditioning. And what did we do? We went out and sit under the trees, didn't we? At Grandma's house, we went out and sit under the shade trees until it was cool enough to go inside at night. But people, used to really understand the use of trees and et cetera to monitor the environment, because you had to, because you didn't have things like we have, like air conditioning. But even the planting in winter winds, by planting a large tree, an evergreen tree, about 5 feet from the house, you can modify a 12-mile-an-hour winter wind to a 5-mile winter wind. That's pretty astounding to me, how you can really impact, what's happening to the environment in your house by that, by creating that dead air space. Again, putting trees, if the wind usually comes, and part of that we were talking about in landscape design is know where the sun sets and where the sun rises. Now, some people, this is a hard concept, Is your garden in the sun in the summer? Is it, in the morning? Is it in the sun in the evening? And the same way with winds. Which way do winds usually come? Because normally winds will come, for the most part, from a certain direction. And kind of knowing that, and if you know that most of your winds come from the north, you can actually slow those winds down from 100% wind speed to 40% wind speed. And this is particularly important if you live in a place that has a lot of snow. Now, we don't have a lot of snow here anymore, but I don't know how many, you said you lived in Texas, and I don't know if you lived in West Texas or where you live, but if you live out in an area that really got a lot of snow and wide open spaces, if you travel, how many traveled out west? Utah, Wyoming, Montana. You will see miles and miles of nothing. And then you'll see a home and it's got green trees all around it. And they've planted those to protect from that blowing snow. And the other thing you see is snow fences, obviously. And you'll even see signs on the highway. We took a big trip last year. We're traveling this year. Oh, nobody's traveling this year, but we went out west last year to Arizona and Sonoma and all that in there. And you see a lot of the snow fences, the orange snow fences to keep the snow from blowing over the highway. You also see, I saw it a lot in Kansas and in Colorado, they're using more and more evergreen snow fences. Instead of just using your orange snow fence, and it's so much prettier, but they're actually planting low-growing evergreen type trees along the property line right before the highways and stuff that act as a snow fence. So you can do the same thing in your home. Again, that's more for an area that gets a lot of snow, which we don't so much anymore, but it's certainly a good element to remember. And of course, energy conservation, kind of like we're talking about, you know, the trees in grandma's yard, you know, planting a tree. You just have to be careful. We're going to talk about that more, that you don't plant that tree too close to the house. But certainly you can reduce the temperature in your home by having shade trees around. And, you know, that's one of the decisions you make when you buy a new home versus an older home. You know, they always say you plant a tree for your children or grandchildren, right? I mean, you know, you buy a brand new, beautiful home with no yard, you're planting trees, well, you're planting them for the next owner and the next owner and the next owner, probably, because unless you're going to live there a very long time, because it just takes, obviously, a long time. You can also hide objects that you don't want seen with trees and other type of screening, grasses. We'll kind of talk more about that later. But certainly we can hide things that we don't want to look at, whether that's our neighbors or whether it's something in the yard you don't want to look at. We also can use berms and trees for noise control. And I always talk about this, and I always forget the highway going to Barnett. What is that? 62. 62. Right before you get to Barnett. 52, yeah. Right before you get to Barnett, there's a guy that has an excavating company, and he has along the highway, you don't know where I'm talking about, he has along the highway the world's biggest berms. I mean, he has huge berms between the highway and his home. And I'm sure he did that for two reasons. One, privacy, and two, is to cut out the noise of the highway. But you'll see this a lot. You know, when I'm in the city, who said they came from Kansas City? Yeah, you know, I look at these lovely homes and they're right there on the interstate. Oh my God, why would anybody build a $250,000 home right on the interstate? But a lot of times you will see berms, you'll see, of course, high fencing to try to cut down on that noise. Because noise can be a problem and it can certainly hurt the value of your home. I mean, you know, there's people that will not buy that home because of that. So some design principles. Let's talk about unity. Unity is that element that ties landscaping together by unifying one area with the other. And you do that by repetition of color, curved lines, and construction material. So it's kind of hard to explain, except when you see it, you know it. If you go, how many of you have been to like the botanical gardens in St. Louis? Or maybe, go there. How many of you have been to, what's the one in Powell Gardens? How many have been to Powell Gardens? Okay, yeah. And you will really see wonderful examples of unity. And whenever you have a chance, and I said this before, but to go on garden tours, and this is the year of no garden tours, but Jeff said he has a wonderful garden tour. But we have a garden tour. Lebanon has a garden tour. Where else do you know of? Herbaceous sometimes does.
Wherever I go visit, I've been to Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I go on vacation.
Yes.
I do formal gardens and I love them.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn so much and get so many neat ideas about going to professional botanical gardens. If you ever go to the one in Phoenix, Arizona, totally different than Asheville. I mean, it's all cacti and everything, but it is breathtaking what they've done. And it really teaches you to learn to garden with the environment that you have. And that's really what landscape design is all about, is understanding the environment and creating beauty within that environment.
We went to like Omaha Zoo, you look any place you go, there's a lot of professional work done, really nice landscaping in public areas. Branson, several of the places down in Branson has some beautiful, like Dogwood Canyon.
Oh, Dogwood Canyon is
I
gorgeous,
can't
yeah.
remember.
Have anybody been to
Some of them
Dogwood
are
Canyon?
over there, but
Yeah.
It's like any place I go, I said, you can just go.
The closest place that I know that has a lot of beautiful professional landscaping is the Capitol, in the Governor's Mansion. Lovely. Have you all, I grew up in Jeff City, but if you go to Jeff City and you just have an afternoon and you want to take a drive, go to the Capitol. In the spring, there are thousands and thousands of tulips. It's beautiful.
Springfield has some really nice gardens.
Yeah,
Springfield, they have
exactly.
a Japanese garden, they have some beautiful gardens down.
And you can social distance so if you're looking for something to do to get out, and a lot of times there's no fee, or if it is, it's a small fee and it goes to the upkeep of the garden. So, so it's really a good thing to do, is just to always be on the lookout for beautiful professional gardens. Now, talk a little bit about balance. And balance is tricky because sometimes we plant things and they're both the same size when you start out. But what happens is one grows faster than the other. One only is going to get this big and you didn't realize it, and this one's going to get this big and you didn't realize. And what you wind up with is, on the left, that's an unbalanced entranceway. And it's not a good design concept. Whereas if you look at the other, that's a very balanced look. So that's something you need to keep in mind, and you need to develop an eye for. And when you're out touring gardens and looking at gardens, kind of thinking, well, what do I see that's unified? What do I see that's balanced? And what do I see that's not balanced, that's not appealing to me? And sometimes you can't put your finger on it, but you just say, that just doesn't look right to me. And when you get to looking at it, you'll say, oh, now I see what's wrong with that. Okay, so balancing the visual weight of objects in the landscape is important. And also the way objects relate to each other. Now, this is a very large home and has a very large tree in the front, and it looks fine. But if I had that very large home and I had a little bitty tiny squatty tree, you're never going to see it. It's going to get lost. On the other hand, if I had a sweet little cottage, which I love, but I had that great big tree in the front, you don't have, the two things are not going to relate to each other that well. So again, another design element to keep in place. Rhythm. What identifies the rhythm in this picture? What do you see? The edging, exactly. The curves, etc. And if you notice, they're all made out of the same kind of material. Now, that's another place where you can kind of get in trouble, is you start out and boy, Menards has got a good sale on just white concrete edging and stepping stones. Well, then the next year, Home Depot's got a great sale on the red ones. And then the next year, I'm adding more beds and etc. And now I've got gray. And pretty soon you wind up with 3 different colors of foundation. It's not the end of the world, but it really doesn't lead to this rhythm that we're talking about. So when you're thinking about this, particularly in the foundation part of your yard, think about trying to maintain the same colors if you can.
The design also make up for that color difference if there's a certain style of stone or edging. And change colors that match.
It's whatever, by looking at it, does it flow through? It's basically what you would make your decision on. Another thing is, in this same garden, is repetition. And I'm going to show you some pictures if we have time at the end, but of gardens that I've visited. But what is the repetition here? What do you see repetition of? Same flower and same color. Yeah. So by planting a mass amount of the same flower, a lot of times over the years, and as I say, I've kind of changed my gardening, but I used to go and I bought a flat of this and a flat of this. And I usually, this year I only planted 2 different things. I planted geraniums and lavender. Those are the only 2 things that I planted. I have multiple flats of each one of them. But sometimes, and it just depends, but sometimes, particularly if you're gardening in a small space, it can be more appealing and appear larger if you don't have a multitude of colors and a multitude of different, or if you do have a multitude of different kind of flowers, keep them within the same color range, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So rhythm can be expressed in color and in form. Okay, now I get in trouble on this one. Keep the landscape simple and avoid cluttering your yard with unnecessary objects. Use statuary at discretion. Here's the problem. People keep giving me stuff. My kids, my friends, for birthday, for Mother's Day. My husband says, where are you going to put another thing? I have all of this stuff that over the years people have given me, and you have to really watch. And when I go shopping, I think, oh, that is so cool. I want to buy that. And so what you wind up with sometimes is a hodgepodge of a lot of what I call hardscaping, a lot of doodads. Now, I don't know if anybody in here's into what do you call them? Garden gnomes. Any garden gnome people in here? Don't overdo it. Only one. Sometimes you see 10, 15 garden gnomes. Got to be careful there. So anyway, just be careful with that's called hardscaping. It is a problem because over the years, I'm telling you, people have given me all this stuff. And I'm saying now, do not give me another thing. I just don't have room for it. I have no place to put it. We also talk about harmony. And harmony is basically a pleasing arrangement of plants, and so that the whole landscaping appears to blend together. And that's that. And you do that from what we were talking about repeating and nice curves and, all of those kinds of things. Talk a little bit about accent plants. An accent plant is more subtle than a specimen plant. We're going to talk about specimen plants and accent plants. It's considered to be a featured plant in a grouping of other plants. Now, where's the accent plant in this? The red bud? Yeah. Now, here's the deal with that. How long is that going to last? Yeah, maybe a month. So that is an accent plant for sure, but you need to remember it's only going to be an accent for a month. So that's why sometimes people say, I want to have something blooming all the time. That's when you're picking and choosing flowers that you want as an accent plant that bloom over time, from March through October, so that you always have something in that area that's going to be an accent. So some basic plant elements. We're going to look at size, form, texture, and color. Plant size. Looking at trees, and again, when you're planting trees, as I said, when you're planting these kind of trees, for the most part, you're planting them for future generations, and I'm all for that. Believe me, I'm all for that. But you need to remember that it's going to take a while to get 25 feet. And so small trees, and some of these, particularly the redbud, I know for sure, and I think crab oak's the same way, they're going to be 12 to 25 feet, but they're pretty fast growing. A redbud, I have a redbud in my yard that probably 7 or 8 years ago was this big. It's above the treetops now. Redbud are very fast growing. They grow very fast. But you just have to keep that in mind when you're planting, that it's going to take a while. And so I tend to use a lot of shrubs because you get your bang for your buck right away. And usually you get, well, within the first year or two of planting them. Lilacs, some of them take a little bit longer, but you're gonna get a bang for your buck right away. You're gonna see about 6 to 12 feet. And then in your smaller shrubs, which would be 6 feet and under, these would be examples of what you would see in a smaller. So again, look to your landscape plan. Look to where you want, where you want to plant a tree, a large shrub, or a small shrub. Understanding, is this going to be something that flowers? Is this going to be something that sheds leaves? If you don't want to spend a lot of time picking up leaves, you don't want a lot of trees. So again, it's a little bit to do with how you want to spend your time. In looking at plant form, I can't believe they have the Bradford.
I know, right? And then, well,
Ignore
ignore
that.
that there's no such thing anymore because now it's a calorie pair and there is still an invasive plant. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll let you talk about it.
Well, of course, I've been giving this for how many years?
I know, right?
I don't know.
Lance will talk about that.
Yeah.
Bases.
So what we're talking about is, they're saying now not to plant a Bradford pear there because they're invasive. But anyway, so what we're looking at here basically is the plant form. So if you look at the witch hazel, for an example, and witch hazel is a really interesting thing to plant. Anybody have witch hazel? Your witch hazel? And it gets fall color, doesn't it? So it's one of those things where you have the green, but you also have a nice fall color. So it could be a little bit of a specimen kind of thing, just because you get that pretty fall color. And as we get into crepe myrtle, I love crepe myrtle. And crepe myrtle is the same way. In the fall, it turns real pretty, kind of purple, crimson color. Gives you a lot of color in the fall. But your witch hazel is more of a spreading kind of plant. Doesn't get real big, but it'll spread out. And then you've got a broad spreading plant like your junipers, your yews. And then you have your weeping types of plants. So again, these are all plant forms. Weeping willows, you see a lot of them if you get out on the lake. You see a lot of people down on the lake, on the shore, have weeping willows. I think they like pretty wet feet, don't they? I think so. And again, they're kind of, I don't know, I've always kind of had trouble growing them, but I think once you get them growing, and they're one of the first things that come out in the spring are weeping willows, so they're early spring. But again, you see the difference between the plant form of a weeping willow versus a witch hazel, which is a small spreader. I'm giving you more examples here. Put my glasses on.
I'm glad you told me that about the witch hazel, since I have one to plant. And
Oh.
so I need to, yeah. Okay, so just before COVID, I ordered 100 trees from Missouri Department of Conservation. 100. They showed up March 31st. They're all bare root trees. You guys can see some examples of them out in front. So I had to dispose of 100 trees with a no contact order, right?
Yeah. Trying to pick up.
I've got a weeping willow and a deciduous holly and some.
Yeah, boy and girl holly, or just.
Yeah, I hope so. I kept 5 of them. I figured some of them have to be boys, right? Play the odds. And then I also have a button bush, which is actually doing quite well, but I kind of just keeping my witch hazel in a pot till I find a good spot for it. So that helps a lot. That tells me where not to plant it.
Yeah. So, and again, the lilac, and some of these you have miniatures of too. I know they're making a miniature lilac now for sure. A regular old-fashioned lilac will get up 15, 20 feet tall. It'll get really big, but the miniature ones are not nearly as big. But they're more of your straight up and down type of element. The ones that's more of a columnar would be your junipers. And then the oval, well, ash and the Bradford pear, which we're not talking about. So again, you're deciding, what do you want? Do you want something that spreads out? Do you want something that weeps? You want something that's tall and slender, you know? So when you're putting your landscape, and you know, the best thing to do is, of course, you can get books, but sign up for every garden, what do you call those, nursery journals that you can get your hands on. And you can look through there, and it helps you a lot. You might not be gonna order through them, but it gives you an idea what this is gonna look like, how big it's gonna get, where to put it. Plant texture, again, when we're talking trees, we have the fine texture, which is your honey locust, your medium texture, which would be ash or forsythia, and then the coarse, which is the sycamore or the hydrangea, would be all examples of more of a coarse. So I hear thunder. So,
That's when I told to show the closest window.
So-
Everybody else is, I think you're okay.
yeah. So again, one of the things that makes your garden interesting is different textures. And the other thing is, what does it look like when it's in bloom? And what does it look like when in the wintertime? Because some of these have really, well, we'll get to a couple of these later on, but they have really interesting textures in their branches, even in the wintertime. And so it gives you a lot of that appeal year round. So we talk a little bit about color. I don't know what I did with my color wheel, but my travels, I've kind of lost it. But I would encourage you all to get a color wheel. You can get them at Hobby Lobby, Joann's, Walmart. Who goes in there anymore? But anyway, you can get them there. But I would really encourage you to have some sort of a color wheel with your garden journal, with your landscape plan, and when you're planning your garden, because it's just really important that, again, you don't go out and buy something of every color, because it's just, you get, as I said, you get wound up with mishmash. We'll talk more about color later. This is talking about within trees. How many of you have Japanese maples? We have they're just gorgeous trees. I just love my Japanese maple. The only thing about Japanese maple is they're pretty susceptible to ice damage. So I've been really concerned some years when we have ice, but they turn from a green to a crimson, beautiful deep crimson in the fall. So again, it's nice to know what colors you're going to have in the different seasons, because a lot of plants will give you different colors in different seasons. And of course, the crimson maple. Summertime, your barberry gives you a lot of that red crimson color. Birds like it. I believe that's another Japanese maple there. Beautyberry is another one. Summer into early fall. And these are things that I think that we should consider putting in our gardens versus annuals. I mean, annuals are okay. You can spend a fortune in annuals, and then what happens in the spring, down, turn around and spend another fortune. So there's things that you can plant and buy that come back year after year after year, like some of these things we're talking about. So in the long run, it's just a bigger bang for your money. Mountain ash, do we see that around here? I don't think so. Mountain ash. No, I don't think so. I don't see that around here. That's the other thing, is you got your book out and you're looking in the winter and you're dreaming and you see something, you need to make sure that it's going to grow in this environment. You're going to spend a lot of money, and it's beautiful. It might be beautiful the first year, but it can't stand the weather that we have. It's just not going to grow. So make sure that is appropriate for this zone, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. Your grape holly, Oregon grape holly, cranberry viburnum. And in the fall, again, you've got your maples. Different colors, your oaks. This is an oak forest here. We got a lot of oak in this part of the country. This is what your witch hazel looks like.
I love witch hazel. I love smelling it in January. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you hope that spring is coming.
Tell me about the hawthorn tree. What's an interesting fact about the hawthorn tree? It's the Missouri state tree. Who knew? Most people think it's a dogwood, I think. It is the hawthorn.
What's the flower?
Now, this is the coolest plant. It's called a corkscrew willow. Look at this for wintertime. Isn't that just the coolest thing? And these, you can cut them and put them in arrangements in the wintertime, and it just gives all kinds of texture. I just think they're the neatest tree. And they look like that. There you go. That's how we garden on a budget. We take starts from other people, right? And of course, Rosa Sharon. I have 2 big Rosa Sharon, and I love them. But a lot of people don't like Rosa Sharon because they're messy, number one, and they grow babies all over the place. So they just grow babies all over the place. Now I spray my babies with vinegar and salt, you know, around the bottom of my tree all the time, and that kind of keeps them. But they are, but
There's a lot of work.
oh yeah. But they're pretty, and they're pretty, and the hummingbirds like them. They bloom all summer long. Mine are huge. I mean, they get really big. But they do grow these little babies all around them that are a problem. So probably one of the things that I have the most of, and on the property I live at Osage Vistas, we have a ton of ornamental grasses. But if you are gardening, our Property Owners Association is gardening on a budget, and we have hundreds of ornamental grasses because you can dig them up and transplant them, and you don't have to water them. I mean, in this environment, they're probably one of the best bargains you can have. And all kinds of ornamental grasses. You want to cut them in March, cut them down, and they're kind of messy. You want to wear glasses because I scratched my cornea one time trying to cut those things down. But you leave them up, you leave them, you know, with their winter interest, and then cut them in March, and they'll be back in a month. And there's, like I say, there's all kinds. Now you do need to watch because there are some that are not hardy. They're really pretty, but they're not hardy here. So they'll be really pretty for one season, and then you won't keep them. So make sure that they're hardy in this zone. And the other thing, when you're looking at plant color and texture, that I truly love are your river birches. They're so pretty, but they are also very prone to ice damage because we've lost several on our property when we had ice storms. But oh, I just love that crinkly curling on the bark. I just think it's so pretty. You've got your spruces, and this is American high bush. Of course, in the spring, you have the redbud, and this, we come back from Florida in March. Once we get to Alabama, cross from Florida over to Alabama, I start seeing redbuds. Then as we move on up through Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas, and finally get to Missouri, I know I'm home because you can just see the redbuds, you know, starting. And they tend to grow in little clumps, you know, groups of them together. Late spring, you've got your chokeberry. This is a cool little plant too. Smoke bush. Anybody have a smoke bush? They look just like that. Isn't that neat? And the ones that we have on property have been there for years and years and years. So you don't do anything to them. Those just drop. You don't prune them or anything. So they're called a smoke bush. So if you really want something that kind of unusual, you don't see a lot of them around. They do very well in this environment. That would be one you'd want to look at. If you want, that could be a specimen plant, you know, because it's so unusual. Yes. So we're going to talk about specimen plants, accent plants, corner plantings, foundation plantings, entrance plantings, borders, screens. Okay. So the difference between a specimen plant and an accent plant, your specimen plant is really the center of attention. Now, what's the center of attention in this? I mean, that tree, obviously, is your specimen. It's your focal point. But you don't want too many focal points in one garden. But, you know, you can use hardscaping too. A fountain can be a focal point. So, you know, you can have in different areas, but you just need to be careful. It's kind of like the same thing with all of the hardscaping when I was talking about you can get too much stuff in there. You can get too many focal points. So then none of them really become a focal point. So you want to use those sparingly. An accent plant is more subtle than a specimen, and it's the featured plant in a group of plantings. So again, like I said, you know, if they have color for a certain time span, you can plant other things around that, and it becomes the specimen plant the accent plant for a period of time. Corner plantings, one of the things about building, particularly around the lake, is that because you're building on rock, on top of rock, we have these huge concrete footings. You know, looking up from the lake, sometimes you have concrete before you ever get to the house, you know, or even in flat areas, a lot of times because it's rock, you have that very high concrete area before you get to the home, and that can be unattractive. And when you're talking about landscape design, you want to plant around that to tie down your house so it doesn't look like it's floating out there in this concrete maze. So it blends the vertical line of the house with the horizontal line of the house, basically. But you don't want to plant anything around your house that's going to grow higher than 2/3 the height of the eaves. 2/3 the height of the eaves. So again, study up what you're planting because it can overwhelm the house. It'll be okay for a few years, but it can overwhelm what you're trying to do. Corner plantings, examples here. And how many of you have rain gardens? Anybody know what a rain garden is? What are you doing rain gardens? What are you doing rain gardens? Who's doing it?
If I, Kathy Bain, Kathy Bain does it. Okay, is she not teaching you?
She is.
Okay, they're good, yeah.
I think she talked about the rain garden at Wilmore Lodge.
Oh, Wilmore Lodge.
Yes.
That's rain garden.
Yes.
Well, corners are a good place for rain gardens because you've got your spouts coming down and you want to plant things that like having wet feet. But it's a way also to stop the drainage from rushing off your house and tearing up the rest of your yard, you know, because sometimes you take a torrential, Jeff City had 5 inches of rain last night. Well, I can tell you it tore up some yards. You know, when you get that much rain that fast. And you can protect your investment sometimes by the use of rain gardens and by the use of like corner plantings like this. Again, foundation and entrance plants help anchor the house. You also usually want to direct the eye through boxwood or through other plantings to the entrance of the house. Obviously, you're not gonna plant going toward a picture window. You're gonna plant obviously going toward the entrance of the house. Borders, actually, this is an island. I don't know why they show this, but borders are groups of planting that are used to divide spaces, and they can be used to direct foot traffic. Now, to me, this is not a border. This is an island because you can walk all the way around it. There we're using boxwoods, and the lady said she had boxwoods. Typical use of boxwoods. If we have time, I have some pictures of gardens that I toured in Europe, and they use a lot of formal gardens, and they use a lot of boxwoods. And you see them. Who said they had a lot of roses? You do. A lot of times it's typical to see those rose beds protected by boxwood. You know, you'll have boxwood and then a little entranceway and then your roses in the center of that. That's a pretty typical landscaping that you'll see in like European gardens. In fact, I think that's probably what you see here. That's protecting some plants. Screens are things that we put up to protect us from sometimes the environment, noise, privacy. You know, those are all reasons why we have screens. Evergreens make great screens because they stay green all year round. But a screen to be effective needs to be at least 6 foot tall. So again, if I'm planting for a screen, I don't want to plant a slow growing tree or shrub because by the time I get my privacy, I've moved on probably, you know. So again, be aware of how rapid growing that plant is going to be if you're going to use it for a screen. Here's, oh, those almost look like Rose of Sharon maybe. Again, a very large shrub being used as a privacy screen. And again, if you've got traffic or if you have neighbors, and you know, I make light of that, but we sold one house to our neighbors. I mean, you know, it can be pretty uncomfortable if you have neighbors that have a variety of reasons why you don't wish they weren't your neighbor. But, but you can certainly use things like this. A Rose of Sharon gets really big, it's pretty fast growing. Would be a good way you could use for a very fast growing large screen. And again, here's more examples of trees and stuff that are used as screens. This is talking about group plantings. You know, this particular slide, I never have liked it. To me, it is just not comfortable. And the reason is, are you all familiar with feng shui? I know the feng shui is off, and I'll tell you why. It's because your back is exposed when you're sitting on that swing, for one thing. If you have a bench or a swing or even chairs, particularly out in the middle, you're very exposed all the way around. So if this were mine, I would put some sort of I would have put moved that arbor over closer to that tree. You want to feel like your back is protected. I guess it goes back to cowboy days, you know. You don't want to be shot in the back. I don't know, but anyway, to me that's uncomfortable. But then that's just me. But I don't feel like this has good feng shui. So you always want to remember you want to plant the right plant in the right place. So selecting plants. We're going to talk about cold hardiness, light requirements, soil drainage, pests, rate of growth. We've already talked about that. Do you all know what range, what zone we are? No, we're probably 5 to 6. It depends really on where you are to the lake, makes a difference.
Jim talked about it last week. Eldon is probably closer to 6, or 5, and Lebanon is probably closer to 6, you know.
Yeah, the lake is sort of a weird, it impacts, and there's no doubt, I don't know, if you leave here and drive to Eldon, you have completely different weather. I swear, they'll have rain. We don't have rain. It'll be cold one place, 5-10 degrees warmer. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really amazing the difference.
East or west.
Yeah, right. And that is what they call the lake effect, you know.
I-70 and I-44, stuff is always either north of I-44, or south of I-44, north of I-70. It's just kind of like,
In the city is really north of the city all the time. Usually in the south.
Yeah, but north of Kansas City's up there on the plain. Yeah, they're up on the plain coming out of Iowa. When I watch the weather, I watch the local weathers, Jeff City, Columbia, at 5:30, and then, or at 5, and at 6 I watch Springfield. Because we tend to be a little more Springfield actually than we are Jeff City. So I watch both of them and figure out, you know, I'm going to kind of be in the middle there, but it is very strange. But again, when you buy plants, it'll say this is good for this zone. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. And the other reason why, and I don't know how much, Joanne, you order out of catalogs, but sometimes you order out of catalog. I tend to buy stuff that's been raised here because it was grown here and it's hardened off here, you know, and you buy something that was raised in Michigan, they have a completely different weather picture than we have. And fruit trees is an example. You know, you buy your fruit trees from Michigan, you know, companies. There's a lot of great companies that sell fruit trees out of Michigan, but they're not, you know, our weather is totally different weather than theirs. So that's why I like to buy from the local nurseries if I can. Also looking at light requirements when you're planting, does it say shade? Does it say dappled sun? Does it say full sun? I mean, if you are planting hydrangeas in full sun, unless you have, I don't know, limelight, and a couple of them will take it, but hydrangeas want morning sun, afternoon shade. Hostas, morning sun, they don't like a lot of sun at all, but if you take and plant them in a really sunny place, they're not going to do very, they'll look pretty good for 2 or 3 weeks, but then they burn up because that's not what they like, you know. So you need to be very aware of, and I said this when you're putting your plan together, where is the sun in the morning and where is the sun in the afternoon, etc. You also need to know, and you need to put it on your plan, is how well drained your soil is. If you've got boggy places for one reason or another, sometimes what's typical around here is a spring. A lot of places have springs, particularly more out in the country. And you know, it's just wet there all the time. So you really need to be aware of that and make notes on your plans and plan accordingly, because poorly drained soils result in your plants rotting, crown rot, you get root disease, frost heaving. You know what frost heaving is? Ever heard that term? Basically what happens is the plant just falls over and the roots are exposed. So how can you correct that? Well, by planting the right plant, you can sometimes amend your soil with organic material and raised beds and berms. And I think I'm seeing more and more and more raised beds around here. I just think it was talked about a lot maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but don't you think there's more and more raised beds? Yeah. Well, for one thing, yikes. For one thing, when you get old, it's much easier to garden. You're not down on your hands and knees quite so much. You can amend your soil and have good soil. You can cover them. I think somebody said you said you had covered things that you planted. You can cover them with wire or netting and protect them. So there's a lot to be said for raised beds. And
My husband, the moment straight line, this is what my raised beds.
yeah, and they're not that, they're not all that difficult to build. And there's a ton of stuff on Pinterest about raised beds. But if your soil is rocky and full of clay, and you want to do any vegetable gardening at all, you're probably going to have to use raised beds. Have they tested their soil yet?
No, our soil section is at 4 p.m. today.
Oh,
so
okay,
no, we
we're
have
going to
not
get to
done
that.
yet.
They're going to tell you all about that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But again, you need to know what the pH of your soil is, particularly for things like azaleas and rhododendrons and blueberries and pin oaks. They need a specific pH in the soil. And so what you're going to get to do is you're going to get to go around about 4 or 5 places and in your garden and test the soil, and they'll give you a report back, right? It tells you what that is. So that's going to help you a lot to know what to plant where. Now you can amend that soil, but plant susceptibility. Some plants are very susceptible to insect and disease. Roses, I finally gave up on roses because they are high maintenance. I love them, but they are high maintenance. One of the nicest rose gardens I know around here was Dr. Snell's. Yeah, he's got, I guess it's still there. But has absolutely gorgeous, English roses. But it is a lot of work, and you're working.
When you go on gardening tours, you get to see some really good stuff.
Yeah.
Some beautiful houses.
So unless you're really into high maintenance gardens, and it's even harder if you want to be organic, I think, and not use chemicals, then you need to think about things that are less disease. We have pine wilt, and I don't know, are we seeing any of this? I don't know if we're seeing any pine wilt.
Not necessarily pine wilt. There's some other issues with trees that we talked about last, well, not with this group, but that we're monitoring this year.
And of course, the ash trees.
Yeah,
Anybody have ash? We have ash borers. And I know on our property where I live, it costs us $7,000 every 2 years to treat all of our trees for ash borer. But if we don't do that, we got a lot of trees.
You're committed.
Yeah. But they also treat for Japanese beetles. So I haven't had a Japanese beetle. Have you had a Japanese beetles this year?
Yeah, one couple.
I've only had 2.
It's actually.
Knock on wood, we're not talking about it.
I've had quite a few.
Yeah.
Even though I put down the lawn, grass.
Japanese beetles will decimate your garden. Your crepe myrtle.
Last week they slowed down.
They went in cycles. 5 years from now, they'll be gone.
Well, I will tell you that I monitor them for the campus, and it's way significantly down this year here in Tuscumbia. And at my home, where I treated with milky spore 2 years in a row, almost done.
Yeah, my garden was milky spore too, and got to get rid of the grubs and different things. But they're nasty.
Like roses.
Yes.
Yes. I haven't checked the rose bush I have lately. Yeah.
So this is kind of a repeat, but one of the most common mistakes that people make in landscape design is underestimating how big a plant is going to get. So you want to select plants that will reach the appropriate size for the location you have in mind and can be kept in bounds. Can you trim it down? Can it be kept in bounds? This is a good example. Now this is a sweet little house with a sweet little pine tree. That's the same sweet little house.
Oh my goodness.
Pine tree.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oops, yeah. So what are you going to do? Cut down that beautiful tree, you know? But the thing you have to remember is that if you have planted in the area of electrical utility lines, the utility company will come in, and this is what you'll have. And they have the right to do that, and they will do it. And we did have somebody from the utility company in one of our classes. Yeah, so I really shook my hand at him, and he was trying to learn better, but they will just come in and decimate to get your lines free. Because obviously, what happens when there's bad weather and ice, you know, the lines go down. In Springfield, Missouri, they had beautiful old trees and beautiful neighborhoods. And about, I don't know, when was that big ice storm?
Like 2000.
I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. I mean, Springfield lost electricity for like 2 or 3 weeks. And so the electric company went in and just took down tree after tree after tree after tree. Now they've had a community effort for replanting and trying to plant, you know, make better decisions with planting, but it's sad when it happens. So.
They came in to cut down a tree, kind of raise things on a tree I had. And I said, well, it's getting too much shade on my garden. So I said, can you just, if you're going to chop it up, can you just take it down? I know what happened.
Yeah.
He said, well, I called my supervisor, they did, and they took it down. They left the tree, which was fine for me. And I did all the chopping up after that. But I saved the cost of bringing the tree
There you
down.
go.
I asked them to let me remove it, because they do chop. I'd rather them taking that all out.
Yes.
Leave something like that.
I know.
Oh,
I know.
yeah.
In Eldon, I've seen there's a couple places, now they're kind of starting to grow back. When they've done that, I saw that in Eldon.
There are people that have their trees done like that, so they don't sprout out.
Oh, they don't care.
Well,
They
people
die.
do crepe myrtle like that. It's called, what do they call it? But anyway, they'll take the crepe myrtle. I mean, you can trim a crepe myrtle, but in the South, they're really bad about that. They take it down so far, and really you don't have to take it down that far. So, in summary, prepare a landscape plan. Look at group or mass plantings. You want to provide year-round interest. And remember, most gardeners' goal is to have something blooming every month. It can be done. Because, you know, you can plant pansies, and if the deer will leave them alone, and you don't have too bad of a winter, you can have little pansies up close to the house in a pot. And, you know, you can start getting things like a Lenten rose and some of those kinds of things really February. So you can do it, and it's kind of fun. To me, I think that's every gardener's goal, is to have something blooming every month. And of course, you want to write it down in your journal. So we use flowers to provide color. We want to arrange them in defined mulch beds. Accept the right plant, select the right plant for the right place, and enjoy your garden. You know, sometimes I think we work so hard in a garden, we never enjoy it. So I try to walk around in the morning with a cup of coffee and want to do the evening with a glass of wine. But anyway, I try to walk in my garden. And one of the things about COVID is I have done so much more setting in my garden and setting in my cart than I ever did before, because you know, you've got the time to do it. So many times I think we're work in our garden, but we never really sit down and enjoy it. So, you know, enjoy your work.
Talk about arrange plants in defined mulch beds. So, and then you were talking earlier about these borders, the flow and all this. So there's these monkey bird shape around this area where the setting is. And I was saying, I'm just going to take those out and put down some landscape with the pins and, you know, cut holes for where I have plants. And my definition is just going to be by how I mulch it, or, you know, whatever I do. It doesn't need to be an actual barrier.
Well, you do what you want to do, and what's pleasing to you is what you do. And the question she's asking is, she has a kind of a concrete edging, and she's going to take that up, and you're going to put in timbers.
I was just going to leave it bounded by the landscape fabric. It's not
We're just talking more mulch kind of border instead of a hardscape.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I think that would be.
Yeah, and whether or not to just have, it's really a formal versus an informal border. I would urge you, you know, several years ago, we were really into these landscape tinders and railroad ties. The problem with that stuff, it rots after a few years and it's a mess. And you see a lot of it on the lake. And we even put some in different properties that we have, and we have some on a property that I'm living on now, and we're gonna have to take all of that out because over time that rots. So it's a cheaper alternative, but it's not quite as long lasting. It depends on the look you want. If you want more of a rustic look, then I think what you're doing, you just have to watch that your grass and things don't grow up into your beds. So you've got rock. Okay, all right. Because that's the reason people, a lot of times will put a edging around is to keep the grass from overtaking the bed. Yeah, okay. Any other comments or thoughts about landscape design?
I believe there might have been someone trying to do something on the chat.
Oh, let's see.
So,
All right, let's see what happens. Did you see something come up? All righty. Well, we're at the end on this one anyway, so this is a good opportunity to take a break. She says, when you get a chance, can you explain the Japanese beetle and how that relates to grubs? I didn't quite get that. I will. We will cover that in detail shortly, Kathy. For now, and I think you're at a breaking point, correct? So we'll take 5, 10. We have coffee, water, soda. I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to stop the sharing because you're done with this,
I
correct?
think she's enjoying her life now before you explain Japanese.
Her next presentation, Trish.
Pots, I'll just put that over and kind of stick it around, and it kind of helps keep them out. And I take it up at the end of the year and roll it, put it in a black bag, and I reuse it year after year after year. So I think I paid them $15 for a huge gigantic roller, but like I say, I cut it up, but I put it over my hydrangeas, and I planted a lot of small crepe myrtle, and until they get a little bit bigger, I've been netting those. So it's something you can try. And it will sometimes help keep them up.
And you'll find out when you forgot to do it.
Yeah,
Because that's what happened to me.
yeah.
I know someone I heard that there's certain things that the deer like. So I'll think that far away and they'll eat there. And then they'll leave my stuff on, they say, yeah, that would work.
Yeah, I know people that feed the deer because they feel like it keeps them out of their stuff. I don't know if that's true or not, but deer is just a problem around here. It's just what we deal with.
Babies don't know they're not supposed to eat something. I'm going on and saying.
Oh, she forgot to turn the projector on.
Yeah. Oh.
Motion sensors,
Motion sensors, either lights too, if you've got lights to come on. I bought this thing called a Deer Guardian, and you can either plug it in or run it on a battery, and it's got a light on it, and it's got a alarm. So, and it's motion, so it'll go whoop, 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 like that. You know, of course, your neighbors hear that too, but
Is it very loud?
yes, it is loud.
Sorry.
Our deer, we won't even take our mule. And they'll stand as close to you as me. And they
Oh,
can
I
stand
know.
there and look at you and say, oh.
I know,
And then they
I know.
lightly walk away.
Well, I live on Horseshoe Bend, and you know, we have now hunts with bow and arrow, and they give so many permits. I can't see as it's made any difference, but anyway. Okay, we're going to talk about herbaceous ornamentals. I can tell how old this are because this is my little granddaughter, and she was probably 5. She just turned 18, so I've been giving this quite a while. Okay, all right, now what happens? Oh. Okay, I guess this is the first one. Okay, so planning and design discussion points, we're going to talk about personalized landscapes, flexibility of herbaceous plants, and again, the same theme as what we talked about before is choosing the right plant for the right place. But I will say, if you make a mistake in the garden, and everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes they're real losers and you just lose things, but most things can be moved. Trees, no, but as far as plants and shrubs and all, a lot of times they can be moved, so don't give up the ship here. So, we talked a little bit about themes, and sometimes even within a garden, you can have a theme. We see memory gardens where people will take a portion of the garden and maybe from a memorial or a funeral, they get a stepping stone or a little angel or a bench, or that's pretty common anymore to do with memorials. And so then you can work around that and create kind of a memory garden, and that's something that you see. Japanese gardens, Zen gardens. I think last year on garden tour, there was a Japanese garden, wasn't there, Winnie?
Yes.
Yes, I didn't get to that one, but was it on the lake?
No.
It's in Lynn Creek, isn't it?
No, it was, if you took the toll bridge, you turned off, you went to M, but then you turned off onto one of those side roads. So
It wasn't too far from that, whatever that restaurant is down there. It's real close to the bridge.
yes, because his son owned that one. So it's across the toll bridge, but he's on that.
So there are some Japanese gardens around, and again,
Sunrise Beach.
yeah. And I say over and over, and Joanne said the same thing, go on garden tours, go look at people's gardens, and because that's really where you get ideas, and it's all about getting new ideas. So, oh yeah.
So yes, it's a good thing to do.
Yep.
On Netflix, I was just gonna say, because the museum review on Netflix, there's a show called The Gardener, and it's about this guy that did like this huge garden, and he sits and talks for like 2 hours. It's like 20 acres. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot out there. I used to watch Home and Garden, but there's hardly anything on Home and Garden TV about gardening. It's all about homes anymore. There's very little about gardening. Okay, so we're going to talk about borders, islands, formal and informal gardens. A border is a bed that's anchored by a backdrop. It could be a retaining wall. It could be a house, but there's a background to it, and then the plantings are in front of that, and that's called a border. You view it from one side only. If you have a very large border, runs 10, 15 feet, you need to put a walkway in there, either stepping stones or some way that you can get in there and weed and take care of the flowers. So that's one thing you need to remember. An island, the difference between an island and a border is an island is a planting, a bed that you can walk all the way around. So you can view it from all sides. That's called an island. And again, islands need walkways. And islands usually contain some sort of a focal point. And normally within your island, you'll plant, we'll talk about this later, but you'll go high down to low. And that high point, and sometimes it can be just like canna lilies, or something like that. You'll have something in the center that's higher. It's a focal point of that, and then it'll go down in size of plants. On a border, again, you want to plant your tallest plants in the back, and then as you move down to the front, you'll plant your shorter plants. So it's so imperative that you read on your plant what it's going to look like. Otherwise, it's bad feng shui. You've got your high plants in the front and your low plants in the back, obviously. So again, they're advertising that as a border. That is not a border. That is an island. But as you can see, what are the focal points there? Yeah, the grasses, obviously. Yeah, and it looks like there's a few trees, maybe small miniature trees in there too. Yeah. So again, when you're looking at plant placement, you would put your tall plants in the back. And if you are drawing this out in your landscape plan, what I did in mine is after a while you get tired, you can't get it all in, you get tired of running it all out. So I would put here, you have 3 different colors. I would put 1, 2, 3, and then in my legend I would say 1s are daylilies, 2s are whatever, 3s or whatever. So then, you know, you've got that at the bottom, but you don't have to write that out on every one of them. You know what that is. That's a good way to identify what you've got planted. It's not so important if you're planting annuals, but if you're planting perennials, you forget what you've got from one year to the other. Again, on an island, you're going to walk around it. So you want your highest point in the center and then plant it out from that. That would be a top view. It doesn't have to be in the center. I mean, it can be off, you know. A good way to plant an island, and normally this is in a pretty large space, to take a garden hose and lay it out how you think you want it to look, okay? And do you want a kidney shape? Do you want an oval? I mean, perfectly round is kind of boring, but you know, if you want it round, but lay your garden hose out like that. Once you have it how you want it, you take your can of spray paint and you spray around that hose, how that's laid out. So if I'm going to do a new garden, if I'm going to do a new bed next year, I would do this in the fall. And then I would take and I would take up the hose. Now you've got your painted area. And I would cover that grass area, if you've got grass, with newspaper, not any colored black and white newspaper. Wet it down, put mulch on top of that, and wait. And in the spring, you can just plant in there. And the paper disintegrates and becomes, you know, a inch of soil, and your bed's ready to plant. Versus getting out there and trying to dig up grass. Have you ever tried to dig up grass? I mean, you don't want to do that. It's hard to do. So that's a good way. So be thinking, if I want to create a bed for next spring, that would be a way to do it in the fall. Then you could be thinking all winter what you want to plant in there. So formal gardens, lots of boxwood, very geometric, precise plant spacings, and I'm going to show you, I think we'll have time, I'm going to show you some gardens from different gardens that I've visited, and there's several very formal gardens. You don't see, the nearest formal garden that I'm aware of that's public would be the Governor's Grounds and the Governor's Mansion in Jeff City. It's a formal garden. It's a kind of a Victorian garden. It's a beautiful garden. In formal gardens, you have precise plant spacing and color combinations and layout. Your informal garden, you tend to have more free form. What you're talking about is a free form bed, basically. Varying plant heights, relaxed color combinations, you know. This is an example of a formal garden. So what you see here is, of course, boxwood. We talked about that. Quite a bit of hard concrete. Typically in a formal garden, you've got some kind of a fountain or water feature. So that would be an example of a formal garden. You don't have it's a lot of green. and not as many flowers, you know, the profuse waves of flowers. That just isn't what you'd see in a formal garden. This is a medical, I'm sure some sort of a office or medical building, but a formal garden. This would be your informal garden. And you can see here, they don't have hard edging there. Yeah. So just a proliferation of color and texture and types of plants. So again, in your landscape plan, as you write down what you have for perennials, you don't need to do this for annuals, but for perennials, be sure and number those and where they're planted, and then have your legend so you know what that number means, or you'll forget. So in using color, on your color wheel, and this is basically a color wheel, your complementary colors are those across from each other. So blue and orange. Now, if I wanted to plant blue and orange in my garden, what would I plant? Daylilies. What else? Marigolds, zinnias. Yeah. The blues, or you could even, you could kind of go to your, blue to lavender a little bit down that way. That would be a good color combination. Yellow and violet, one of my very favorites. Pansies are, have a lot of that. And then green and red. Or you can plant shades of the same color. So dark red, light red, maybe a little pink, shades of one color can also be the direction that you go. But you need to kind of think, in this particular little garden room that I'm creating, what is my color palette? It doesn't have to be for your whole garden, but in this little garden room, what is it? So like I say, within the red, you can have red, 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 and red. Different colors of red. Neutral colors are considered white, gray, black, believe it or not, green. What would I plant to get black?
There's an iris.
It's a black iris. I believe there's, there is a black daylily, and I think there's a black elephant ear too, I believe. I don't know. I don't know if I've seen that.
There's a sweet potato vine that's really.
There is a black, yes. Problem with sweet potato vines is it's a salad to deer, but I love them, but hard to have here. Bright colors, which are your reds and your oranges and your yellows, just remember that they draw attention, they draw the eye. You can use them as a focal point, but it does make your area seem smaller. So if you have a small area, the size of this room, you probably would want to have some pops of color, but you wouldn't want to have everything in that color because it makes the space seem smaller. But it does have a warming effect and it is festive. Now, again, if you have a real southwestern garden, you want a lot of yellows and oranges to complement that, to get some festiveness to that. Your darker colors, your blues and purples and etc., make your garden seem larger, and they create a cooling effect, relaxing atmosphere. The Victorians planted what they call moon gardens, and they were gardens that were all white. You ever been out in your garden and notice how the colors are right before the sun goes down? If you have anything white, it just pops out. And the Victorians loved to plant all white, and they call them moon gardens. So site preparation planning, again, you need to know full sun. Roses need at least 6 hours of sun, including knockouts, to really bloom. partial shade, partial sun, and then total shade. So, and you have to know whether you want sun in the morning or sun in the afternoon, which do you have? Makes a big difference. One of the things that we tend to do is we tend to overplant. I think particularly annuals, you know, you want it to look great early on. And so you really fill your pots and stuff full. The problem is by midsummer, if they're doing really well, they start crowding each other out. So it's really better, you know, patience is a virtue for gardeners for sure. And so it's really better to maybe plant just one geranium in that pot. And if you wait it out and you fertilize it, that one geranium is going to turn into a really nice piece. But if you plant 3 in there, you know, it becomes overcrowded and etc. So overplanting can really hurt your plant circulation. Plus, your plants will get moldy. They'll get, you know, that white mold on them. So you can improve your air circulation by increasing your plant spacing, thin out branches of trees sometimes, and provide wind protection in high wind areas. And that would be a reason why you might want to put up some sort of a screen in front of some plantings to give them some protection. So we talked about soil testing. You're going to do that. You're going to talk about soil, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. Your loam soil is ideal. You can amend your soil by adding organic matter. How many of you compost? Good. Wow, I'm impressed.
It's not growing.
Well, tell me how you compost. How
I
you?
set up 3 pallets, I put in cardboard, and I just set out a kitchen.
That's yummy.
Oh, they're happy. The critters are happy.
Of course they are.
You know, the other thing you can do is just get you a big plastic trash can and poke holes in it and put the top on it. And it'll keep the critters out of it. And it'll cook. Yeah, I bought one off the internet. I bought 2 things off the internet. I bought a drip system that said easy to install. Do not believe it. But I also bought a composter that turns, and it was.
It's a spinning one. See, I tried the ball that you roll with that.
No, this is just like a big. This is like a big tub with a top on it. Yeah, and I just spin it. It is a little hard to spin, but
It's heavy. Does yours get heavy?
it does get heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but compost. Now, what do you do? Oh, yeah. Yeah, composting is fun, and it really, you can purchase some pretty small, you know, things to compost with. And it's, you know, this whole concept of organic gardening. When do you talk about that?
Oh, I have to check our schedule.
But you're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
You know.
We do.
In the vegetable section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, more and more people are moving away from chemicals. I mean, you know, Roundup gives you cancer. Pretty documented. So I know I use vinegar and salt and a little bit of Dawn is what I spray to use for weed control. And it doesn't give you the same kind of stuff that Roundup gives you.
Tobacco, tea,
True.
There's a lot of information out there, and I guess you all will talk about pests, but there's a lot of information out there about, you know, organic ways to garden. But amending the soil and adding organic matter in composting is certainly a good way. And, you know, I was on a garden tour. I went to, several years ago, they had the International Master Gardener Convention in, where was that? It was in Nashville, I think. And Terry Loney and I went. And we toured, oh, no, it was in Little Rock, Arkansas. We toured gardens all over the place, but we toured one garden, and all he used in his beds is in the fall, he gathered up all of his leaves in black bags. Well, he ran over them with a lawnmower, and gathered them up in black bags and left them in those bags all winter long. And then in the spring, he just dumped those bags full of old leaves in his beds. And he didn't buy mulch. He just used those leaves. So it was a way to gather up his leaves. And his beds were just gorgeous, you know. It's just, And, you know, sometimes we think, what are we going to do with those leaves? But really, you can use those leaves for mulch. So anyway, you can amend your soil by adding organic material, and you want about 2 to 3 inches on top of the soil. We've talked about poorly drained soil. Correcting poorly drained soil, we talked about raised beds, plant selection, weed control. You can use non-selective herbicides, but again, I think people are kind of moving away from those as much as they can. Black plastic, again, I personally used to use that a long time ago, and I'm not using it anymore at all. But you do still see it, but putting those barriers down. Newspaper is a good way to control weeds, and of course mulch. So in planting, annuals you plant in the spring after danger of frost. And around here, I think the last frost is around the 15th of April. It's the date I use. So usually the last week in April, I'm buying my annuals. Now, again, one of the fun things to do is to go to the Mennonite auction. Have you all been to the Mennonite auction? How to get there? Go to Herbaceous. They have a website, and it's called Lovely Penny.
Central Missouri Produce Auction. I get an email from them every day.
Central Missouri Produce Auction. Okay.
I don't get one every day.
And it's ran by the Mennonites, and it's fun to do, fun to go. They have a little restaurant there, and they're all there, and there are horses and buggies. They have huge flatbed trailers. Some of them pull white horses, some of them pull white tractors. They're just filled with flowers, gorgeous flowers, organically grown. Now, you need to go with a friend, because the only downside of this is you have to buy pretty large lots. Like I bought hangers there, and I had to buy it depends on how many you need. So I would buy, friends knew I was going, I'd buy for them. You could get them for much, much less, because all of these places around Eldon and over on 5 and Sunrise Beach, that's where they buy all their flowers, is at the Mennonite auction. So you're really getting them without the third party. So it depends. If there's a lot of people bidding, you can pay more. I've bought hangers for as little as $10 this big. I've paid 15, but I don't think I've ever paid over 15. You know, you're going to pay 22, 23 for big hangers. Yeah, so it's fun to do. And get on the internet. There's days they aren't there. But it's a fun way to go and buy your annuals for sure.
And you can get on their email. We get up to a break. I'll put that in the chat. Actually, I'm going to have to send that to you. You can actually write to this person and ask to be added to his listserv.
So what we're saying is we're going to tell you how to get in contact with for my Zoom people. We're going to tell you how to get in contact with the Mennonite auction and know when they're having theirs, because it's a fun thing to do, and you can go have biscuits and gravy and spend the day, and you have to bid, and you have to be careful, hold your thing up. So anyway, it's fun to do. But anyway, in the spring, after the danger of frost, except for pansies and flowering kale. Now, pansies and flowering kale around here, you can plant in the fall, and if you're really lucky and we don't have too bad of a winter and you plant them close to the house, you might be able to keep them all most of the winter. Just depends on really the kind of winter we have. But otherwise, that's when you would want to plant your annuals. Your perennials, you typically plant, you can do it, but you typically plant it in the season opposite the bloom. And you get a whole extra growing season if you do that. So you want to plant your perennials this fall. for them to be blooming this spring and be doing a good job. So if you're wanting to buy crepe myrtle, butterfly bush, you know, any of that kind of stuff, you want to buy those and plant them this fall. And you probably will get a bloom in the spring. But do remember, it takes about 3 years for a perennial to basically take off and be really looking great. You can count on the 3rd year before it really is going to look good. So, maintenance. Watering systems, as I say, I got one off the internet. Easy to install. I did get that sucker installed, but it wasn't as easy as they said. But anyway, it is a drip system, and I can put it on a timer, and it'll come on and off, you know, and so that's an option. There's people that, any of you live on the lake? Yeah, there's people who water from the lake. There's a garden, and he was on our garden tour, oh, I don't know, years ago when I was still working with the master gardeners. He's a local attorney, and he has a garden across from the state park. And you would be familiar with it if you're out on the boat a lot, but he has hanging baskets, huge hanging baskets, all along the shoreline and all on his dock and up above. And he has a watering system that takes lake water and waters those things. And he's got a little watering system, you know, little black things up there. They're gorgeous. And John Curtin's garden. Have you ever seen John Curtin's garden? Do you remember that garden? Yeah, beautiful garden. But anyway, a lot of people do put in, the nice thing about watering systems like that is you can put them on a timer, you can leave town. That's one of the biggest problems I think that gardeners have is if you leave town in the summer, you got to have a good friend who can come in and water for you. You know, you can't just go off and leave it. So that's one of the problems. Sprinklers are not good. Sprinklers, you know, using a sprinkler would be your last resort. It really causes disease and that kind of thing. So that's really not your best choice. Of course, mulching 2 to 4 inches thick will certainly, and use of barriers will help keep the moisture in the soil, for sure. Additionally, and this is going to tell you on your little tag that you're going to keep from now on, when you plant a flower, it tells you whether or not it should be deadheaded. There's so many things, you know, marigolds, geraniums. I mean, most annuals will continue to flower if you deadhead them. I have a terrible time with petunias. You know, they look wonderful when you buy them and they smell wonderful. About a month into the season, they just poop out on me. But the secret to them is to just keep cutting them. You know, keep them, really give them a haircut, a short haircut, and that will help. And of course, fertilizing them will help. But disc budding promotes flowering. And your large flowers, like your dahlias and things like that, you're going and even your peonies. I have these little cages that I put over the top of my peonies to keep them from falling over. Fertilization, again, 3 applications. I basically fertilize when I plant, and then I fertilize my flowers this time of the year at least once a week. I mean, when it really gets dry and they get stressed, that's pretty much that what you all do. I don't know.
Probably every other, I would say maybe every other.
Yeah, my hangers I try to do once a week because it tends to run out, you know, it tends to run out of them. Your water and fertilizer, it says 4 to 6 weeks. I don't know, I do it a lot more than that, but. Oh, I just use Miracle Grow. What's everybody else use?
Some kind of blue stuff.
Yeah. So then after the freeze, and it's kind of your personal preference here. Some people clean their garden up in the fall, and some people clean their garden up in the spring. I clean mine up in the fall because I leave town all winter and once I get home, I'm on the run. You know, I don't want to mess with cleaning up my garden because I'm ready to start planting. The nice thing about waiting till spring is a lot of times you can still have things that the birds will eat and things like that, and it still give you some winter interest. It's just that I want to get it pretty much cleaned up before I leave town. But basically, you don't, you know, you want to start, and some things, once they die out, I start cutting them back. I mean, who wants to look at that dead stuff? But anyway, start removing most of your plant material, your grasses and things like that, and even like coneflowers, if you want to leave those give you, and Joanne can probably talk natives, I think can give you a lot of winter interest when do you clean up your garden, in the spring or the fall?
I don't really like dead stuff, but I tend to leave stalks a lot for the weeds and stuff.
Yeah.
Birds, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
good pollinators that are.
exactly.
And stuff
Yeah.
around it.
So it's a little bit time management. It's a little bit just, you know, what you like. Mulching in the winter helps present this frost heaving that I was talking about. So a lot of times I'll empty my composter in the fall, and after I've cut stuff back, and then I'll just put that out in the garden. Division, things like iris. Who said you have iris? You know, if they quit blooming, they need to be divided out again. When you plant iris, the worst thing you can do is plant them too deep. I mean, you just want to sprinkle a little soil on them. You know, if things are not blooming, either they're in the wrong place, they're planted too deep. Sometimes they're planted upside down. We'll talk about that later. I've done that before. But those are the things, or they just need to be divided out. A lot of the coreopsis and a lot of things, you know, you've got to divide it or it'll quit blooming, basically. So we have plant types. We have annuals and biennials and perennials and bulbs and ornamental grasses. So annuals, you define an annual as it completes its life cycle in one growing season. So petunias, snapdragons. Sometimes you'll buy something and it'll say it's a perennial, but in this climate, it becomes an annual. So that's another thing about buying off of the internet or buying out of a catalog. It'll tell you it's a perennial, but that's in that zone. And in this zone, it may not be a perennial. Hibiscus can be like mums or another thing. You know, there's two kinds of mums, and a lot of times we buy an annual mum and want to plant it, and it doesn't come back again. So you just have to keep an eye, is this an annual or is this a perennial? Because if it's an annual, it will not come back again. Okay. Advantages of annuals is that you can move it around, and it can be directly seeded because they're expensive, and a lot of people, I know Joanne, you raise a lot of things from seed, don't you? You used to.
You know, I just cut off stuff and throw seeds out my flowers.
Yeah. You used to.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
If you have people have greenhouses.
No, I don't have.
You know, raise Janet Sharman. I don't know if is Janet still a master gardener? Janet Sharman? No. She has a big greenhouse and she grows a lot of things from seed. The other thing about annuals is you have instant color. It's good for containers. I always say I'm not going to plant many pots, and I always wind up with more pots than I need. But the good thing about a pot is if you have a dead space, you can move a pot around. You know, you can move them around in your garden, and so you can kind of fill in dead spaces. Disadvantages is they only last a year, although many people overwinter geraniums. Do you do that, Winnie? Do you do that? I've never tried that, but a lot of people have overwintered them for years and years. Geraniums, have you ever overwintered geraniums?
No,
It can be done. It can be done. But for the most part, they're annual in nature. You also, if they take care, you got to get out there and deadhead them. You got to water them a lot. You need to water them a lot. I mean, days like this, of course, we had a little bit of rain, but I mean, you know, we're talking every day. And of course, Are you a morning waterer or are you an evening waterer? Morning. Pretty much people will say to water in the morning versus the evening. I personally water in my night, in my pajamas. Biennials has 2 growing seasons. They're vegetative the first season and reproduce the second season. So like hollyhock and foxglove, the first year you put them in, they'll just be green. The second year, you'll get your flowers on them. So they're kind of little tricky things, but they're really nice and informal, beautiful and informal cottage gardens. And your perennials will live for more than 3 years. I will say that a lot of perennials, after 4, 5, 6 years, will poop out on you, you know, just will give out. And as I said before, it takes about 3 years for a perennial to really come into its own. And so within your perennials, you have a couple of different kinds. You have your hardy perennials, which basically you plant them and leave them. Your tender perennials, you have to dig them up.
This is the first year that I did clean up my garden in the fall and left everything and kind of the leaves in the bed. And my dianthus came back and I was so surprised.
Well, and that's the deal, is that sometimes a lot of people, it depends on the winter. And if you blew on top of them, if you blew leaves on top of them, you gave them some extra cover there. If they're up close to the house or another structure where they can, the sun will bounce off of concrete and keep the ground a little bit warmer. Like I have a walled garden, so that concrete wall creates a little micro space there, and it's warmer there. And things that my lavender comes back that I plant.
Yeah, I felt bad because I have my lavender out there and I went to pull it out and I went, oh, it's trying to grow.
Yeah, I planted probably 8 pots of lavender and probably 50% of them came back. So I thought that was a pretty good average. So,
Nature will find a way.
so the problem too, if you live in a small space, an apartment or a smaller space and you don't have a basement, you don't have a garage, what are you going to do with this stuff when you dig it up? That's the other problem. You've got to have space. Normally people, I say people used to store them in women's hose, but who wears hose anymore? I don't know what you store them in now, but that's what we used to say, store them in hose. Okay, so advantages of perennials is the long-term cost, you know, over time. I mean, my 2 crepe myrtles, I paid to have them planted. I think I paid $250 a piece for $250, but they'll last my lifetime and another lifetime, and they were already planted, and you know, you get a long-term, you know, thing for your dollar. But they're lower maintenance usually, and they can be mixed with bulb plantings to hide yellow foliage. For an example, daffodils, which you know, around here are blooming sometimes late February. And so you get early color with them, but then after they bloom, they leave that, you know, ugly yellow foliage. And really, to get the best quality of flower, you need to leave that foliage. And so sometimes you can plant annuals around that kind of cover that up until it dissipates. Your disadvantage is, for the most part, they have a blooming time of what, 4 to 6 weeks probably, whereas an annual you plant it in April, and if you take really good care of it, it might still be blooming in October or November. You know, you get a really long blooming season. The initial cost can be high, and many times you do need to divide your perennials. So perennials for sun to part sun, dianthus, your blanket flower, which dries really nice, The height on those are 6 to 12 inches, so they're small. They're nice to use in beds and borders. Your phlox, again, 6 to 12 inches. Your candy tuft, these are all types of perennials. Balloon flower. Anybody have balloon flowers? Yeah. They're a pretty flower, and they're 6 to 12 inches. And then your succulents. I'm going to show you some succulent wreaths in my next really fast presentation if I have time. I used to hate succulents. I thought I just couldn't get, and you have, I think when I went to your house, you had all those hen and chicks. You still have those?
Oh, yeah, still in the same pot.
Oh my gosh, they were huge. So I've grown to love them. You have to kind of get into them. Yarrow and aster. Aster's more of a fall blooming plant with your mums. Silver king, that would not be, that would be an annual around here, I think. I don't think that would be a
It
perennial.
might come back.
Does she? Does your come back? Bellflowers?
Not that one.
Your garden mums and your coreopsis, again, those come back. On your mums, though, you just need to watch, because if you're buying them at the grocery store and places like that, they're probably an annual and not a perennial. You just need to watch that.
You need to buy them in the spring at the plant stores. Those are garden ones. Usually the ones that are forced are not necessarily the ones that come back. The ones that you buy in the fall are not garden.
Right.
In the spring, you can actually buy garden ones.
Right.
And those last forever.
And you know, we are lucky around here because there are quite a few actual nurseries. I mean, you've got the Mennonite and Zimmerman's, you've got the nurseries, and then Longfellow's up in Centertown, and I guess she sold that, but she's still working there.
Yes.
Did you sell it?
Yeah.
Sold it, but she'll be here.
She's got to be our age too.
I know, but I just hate to see her. But she is so nice, very nice, very knowledgeable. Yeah. Foxtail lily. Your red hot poker. Anybody have one of these? These can be a specimen in a bed. They're kind of cool. No.
That's my problem. When I have them, they just want to last for like barely a week.
Yeah.
Pretty, aren't they?
Iris, though, I love iris. All kinds of different colors of iris. These are your native iris. Joanne will talk to you more about those.
They're so cute.
Your phlox and your black-eyed Susan. Now the deer, I used to have a lot of black-eyed Susan, and the deer just mowed them down, so I pulled them up. Latris and oriental lily, I think this is what you were talking about, or Asian lilies. Salva. Lamb's ear is another thing that the deer leave alone. They're pretty good to leave this alone. It's got a lot of texture to it. Does anybody have lamb's ear? It's kind of got fuzzy little leaves on it.
And when they talked weeds last week at that other thing, they talked lambs. That's what they were calling the mullen. The common mullen, which is a weed, is also sometimes referred to as lamb's ear. So they're two separate.
Yeah,
things.
because a mullen gets a big, tall stalk on it.
But it has a soft.
It does.
Okay.
The lamb's ear is just a tiny little thing, and it'll spread. It'll become a ground cover, actually, for you. It'll really spread over time. Hollyhock, butterfly bush, again, does better if you prune it back in March. I don't think so.
No, it's not.
Your larkspur and tiger lily, these are all different kinds. Lupine, I've never had that. You see that a lot in different states. They're really known for that. Russian sage, I have some of that. The deer do not like it. It can get really big. I have to cut mine back.
I don't know, last about 7 years.
They get really woody. I cut mine clear down to the top of the soil, yeah. The silver mound, these sometimes are sold as annuals, but if you mulch them well, they'll last you a few years anyway. bugleweed. Bleeding hearts. Either you do well with them or you don't. David Okoshes has bleeding hearts. He's a mutual friend of ours. Just beautiful, but I've never had any luck with these, but they come back year after year. Daylilies, again, the deer love them. I dug all mine up, threw them away. Because the deer just ate them all the time. They'd come up and bloom and they'd eat them all. So I just got tired of it.
Surprise lilies grow here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Does deer love them too?
No, they don't bother. Well, I mean, they eat the green stuff, but then the surprise lights come up in August. And
Yeah, they're late.
So no one cares.
I always say those are state flower flowers because they come up about the same time that we used to have the state fair, which we're not having this year. Yeah, yeah.
Mine didn't come up this year, which I felt sad about. They actually got, see, I usually get one in the spring and then
Oh, I was gonna say, mine don't come up till August.
so maybe it'll come back.
Clematis, now really, really save your tags on clematis because some of them need to be pruned in the fall. Some of them don't need to be pruned at all. It's whether they grow on new wood or old wood. And so you really, really need to save that. Peonies, I mean, I think everybody loves those. I'd probably not. For sure, if you transplant them, I know they won't.
Most stuff does, and it's just, you might as well just not count on it.
Right.
It's just-
I don't have a TV. I didn't have the, I bought TV.
Yeah, that's not a surprise. And they transplant pretty easy. You know, I've transplanted maybe 4 or 5 around different places in my yard. So they're pretty easy to transplant. But they won't bloom the first year. Lily of the Valley and forget-me-nots. You know, when I was telling you about planting theme gardens, memorial gardens, a nice thing to plant in a memorial garden is a forget-me-not. It's the flower for Alzheimer's. And it's kind of a nice memorial flower if you've gotten a pretty little angel statue or something from a memorial of a loved one. It's kind of a nice thing to put with that. None of these have I planted, but again, they're all options that are out there. Foam flower, periwinkle. That's kind of a vinca. It's kind of can be a kind of a ground cover too. It is
There's
pretty.
some varieties of it, because I have a periwinkle that's not invasive, but then there's a vinca minor and a vinca major, and they can.
And sometimes, you know, if you're looking for a ground cover, it's okay, but.
You know, let mine grow and then every now and then, like every year, so I would start tearing it up and get rid of it and then come back.
Like Missouri primrose, mine's the same way. I tear all those out and I'll be darned, they're back again. They just come back. Corbels. Hosta, a lot of people love hosta, but deer love hosta. So if you've got hosta, some people can, I mean, it loves shady round trees, but it's really tough down here. Bee balm, it's in Joanne's area. I think, isn't that considered a native? This bee
Yeah,
balm?
there's native people.
Yeah.
They're cultivars, because we have a cultivar at Wilmore that's a cranberry color.
The cardinal flower is a pretty flower too. Very pretty. Gives you that red color. So bulbs includes your chromes and your tubers and your rhizomes, and your tuberous roots. And this is the one you have to watch that you don't plant upside down. You have to figure out, you know, look at your bulb and make sure that you've got the root down. Because it's your lilies and your tulips. And of course, a fun thing to do, and the deer do love tulips. But, you know, you can fill a pot with those and then kind of net that pot. Maybe you might get by with having a pot of tulips. Your chromes have a swollen stem base and they don't have any scales on them, like your gladiolas. That would be an example of a chrome. And your tubers have your underground stem, and it's used for storage. And it's like your caladium tuber. And again, you have to be real careful. You want the eyes pointing up and the roots going down. So you'd have to take a good look at them when you buy those and when you plant them. Your dahlia is a true root. And again, just have to see where those little tiny roots are. Your rhizomes would be your iris. And they do need dividing quite frequently, and they don't like to be planted very deep. And they will grow in terrible soil. In fact, they like terrible soil. So your spring flowering bulbs would bloom from February to May. They're hardy, and they provide early color. And then your summer bulbs are June to September, and they tend to be your more tender bulbs, like your glads and things like that. So when you're buying a bulb, you know, if you're picking it out of a bin, you want to get something, you want it to be firm and not squishy. You know, sometimes you look at bulbs and they'll be squishy. You don't want those. Your large bulbs would be your specimen bulbs, and your smaller bulbs would be naturalizing. You want to store them in a cool location, like a cellar. Who has cellars anymore? But a cellar, a basement, or a garage that's cool. You want to dig. When you dig them, you want to loosen the soil around the entire bed and then dig them up. And you want to plant a bulb 2 to 3 times as deep as it is tall. So again, you have to know how tall it's going to be, and then that's how deep you want to dig to plant that. So after they bloom, you want to leave the foliage until it naturally goes back on its own. If you pull it out too early, it causes the bulb to decline. You want to interplant it with other things to kind of cover up that dying out foliage. Spring flowering bulbs would be your ornamental onion and crocus, snowdrops. Those are all ones that bloom real early. February, early March. Forsythia smells so good. You get into your iris, daffodils. Deer do leave daffodils alone, so daffodils are a good choice. Tulips, not so good. So your summer flowering bulbs, you want to plant in the spring. You dig them up before the frost kills them, or right after the frost kills them. You want to clean off all that old soil when you dig them up, and just get rid of the ones that looks diseased, because you know they'll spoil the rest of them. You want to store them in paper bags in a cool place. Never store bulbs near fruit or vegetables. Examples of summer flowering bulbs: begonias, canna lilies.
With cannas, I know like we have a hard winter, they can be bad if they're not planted, but I know a lot of people leave them in, but I have some that come up and some that don't, and I just don't.
That's just the way it is. You know, you can dig them, but you can leave them. And I think if you will cover them, if you'll mulch them really good, and if they're in a kind of a sheltered place, if they're just out in the middle of the yard with no shelter, it's not going to be as easy to overwinter those. You just have to see, you know, how it goes. I figure 50%, if I get 50% of them to come back, I'd, you know, save some money. Dahlias and glads, of course, are nice cutting flowers. Blazing star, your lilies. So your ornamental grasses, we've talked about those. They can be used as a substitute for shrubs. They can be used as screens, as focal points. They don't have a disease problem. They don't have an insect problem. They don't have to be watered. They don't have to be fertilized. They like full sun. I mean, there's a lot of good things about ornamental grasses, and they can be transplanted. You want to cut them back to about, cut them way down, you know, to about 3, 4, 6 inches from the bottom in March. And if you don't divide them, sometimes they'll start dying out in the middle. So if you have ornamental grasses and they're dying out in the middle, you need to divide them next spring. So you have your pampas grass, which is big, 7 to 15 feet. I mean, they get really big. You have like flame grass. Your maiden grass is a pretty one. Porcupine, you can get, there's many different colors and different plumes, and you can get a lot of color and texture from grasses. Your silver feather, zebra grass is a real pretty one. Your fountain grass is smaller, and then you have those soft little plumes that come up. So again, just ideas of what you can plant. Winnie, can you put my other little thing in here?
Trish will have to.
Okay. I thought I would show you real quickly. Do we have time? Okay. I'll do about 10 minutes. I'll ask you some questions. Tell me what you think.
I was just looking at the chat, and one of them is asking about black hollyhock and white flowers that show up at night. Remember when you were talking about the blacks? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment while I get the other item in there, and I need to close your deals. Why don't you guys take just about 5? We're not going to get to Gatlin today. We've got time for Joanne, and I already contacted Gatlin. He's ready to go at 1 o'clock next Monday. Oh, you're fine. It's all good. Yeah, it is. It's quite a bit. So yeah, just kind of talk amongst yourselves, walk up, get some fresh air, do whatever you need to do. Yeah, she saved it for you. Let's see. Let's see how fast this.
My dad said, shoot him. I said, Dad, I can't just shoot him.
You can't just shoot them as much as you want to. I know. Oh my God. Do you need to get to the other pictures on here, or are you, you're going to be able to scroll through?
I think I can.
You see how that?
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this back.
Okay.
And I have a cat, he's useless. I need to hire out my friend's dog to bring him over my yard every now and then, in the armadillo and the deer.
I would do that. I would so do that. I love, I would like another dog. That's all.
I just want to write one.
Okay, I'm going to move through these kind of fast, but I thought we would try to apply learning points. This is a garden in Ireland at an abbey. This is a Victorian garden. And what do you see here? What would be something that you see that jumps out at you? And what would you call that? A specimen, yeah. Specimen. That is called a monkey tree, and it's imported from Brazil. And it's real typical in Victorian gardens in Ireland. I mean, you see palm trees. I mean, who would think that you would see palm trees and things like that in Ireland? But it's really, in their formal gardens, it's pretty common. What else do you see here as far as the design element? It's in an island. What else? Right, that's a hard structure, but yes. And then you see the repetitive color use. And this is obviously a formal garden, beautiful garden. Okay.
I wish that was my garden, and I wish it would just happen that way. So I didn't do anything.
This is the same garden, and so it takes you out a little bit, but you see they have used, embedded in that, they have these other little beds. Then they also have the repetitive baskets. And they're using the same color of flowers in the baskets, which ties, that looks very tied together. And also the use of that blue piping helps tie that together, doesn't it? So there's a lot of things that tie that together. This is an example of, again, repetitiveness, same color, and see how they've planted within the boxwoods. This is Arlington, in Washington, D.C. You go there in the spring and it's just full of tulips, beautiful place to go in the spring. Mm. This is a garden that was on our garden tour several years ago. I thought it was an interesting use of, for one thing, safety, because there's not a handrail on that stairs. But, and you see this a lot in Europe on steps, steep steps on old buildings in France and Italy. They'll have pots of flowers, same kind of flowers, same kind of pots repeated on there. Just creates, you know, if you've got a deck and stairs down to the lake, just kind of a neat thing to do is just put those flowers on there and have the same flowers repetitively. This is, anybody know what this is? This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This is a rain chain, and you find them a lot. You can buy them or you can make them on Pinterest, how to make them. But what this does is when it rains, and it doesn't, particularly in places that doesn't rain a lot, it directs the water straight down to where you want it to go. It's called a rain chain. And again, you can make them. There's instructions.
Those little houses they got from college have these copper gutters, and then they have the rain chains.
Yeah, they're kind of cool. This was at a motel.
Medical center, they have one at the medical center that goes down into the, at the hospitals, campus and offices.
Oh, in their inner garden?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a way to get water down.
It slows it a little bit, so it doesn't dig a deep
That's
hole.
right.
And
That's
it
right.
actually is interesting, depending on how it's made. They can make a little team up.
Yeah, they have them with little cups or little tops on them that are like tin, and it'll make a sound. It's just an interesting thing. If you're interested, pin it on Pinterest, you'll find it. This is, again, I noticed you had a garden with some tiering. This was Nikki, yeah, McDuffie's garden. This was on our garden tour one year. She did a lot of work with terracing. Very pretty garden. This is a garden, this is also on a garden tour, using hardscaping. This garden bothers me, again, with feng shui. Those open jugs just laying there just are not appealing to me. Now, I would have put something in there that would have kind of draped out of there. Yeah, just that open jug, and that's why I took that picture. I thought, but look at those hostas. I don't know if you can see them, but they had beautiful hostas. But about 2 days after the garden tour, the deer came through an $8 hostas. This is a use of hardscaping. This was a garden tour, I don't know, several years ago. They had this huge moose in their garden. Again, using what you have, like putting pots on trees, putting pots in trees or hangers in trees. In Florida, people put orchids in trees and hang them and grow them hanging down from trees. It's really cool. I've got some Florida gardens and I need to get those on here. This is a rain barrel. This is Charlie's rain. Yeah, this is a rain barrel. You can make these, but they sell them at the Gifted. I think they used to sell them at the Gifted Gardens.
They still did not roll up the little websites and know how to get them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't go talk about this.
Oh, we're going to talk about these. You can paint them. Now, see, I would paint mine, but little daisies on it or something. This was a garden tour in Jeff City years ago that I went to, but again, just using an old door and just different watering cans and etc. just out on your deck. I don't know, it's hardscaping and I just kind of like that stuff. I think this was my garden. Yeah, it looked kind of familiar. This was my garden several years ago. It doesn't look like this now. This was my garden too. I've dug almost all that up. Don't have it anymore. Again, this is my garden, but it shows that even in the winter, you know, a wreath here and there, or what hardscaping you use can make your garden interesting in the winter too. This is back to Ireland. And just your informal, beautiful cottage gardens, just the way you think it would be, it's just the way it is. This is a garden that was on a garden tour in Eldon, in the Eldon area. It was all shade garden. And it just goes to show you can just have a beautiful garden. And it was mostly all green, you know, it wasn't a lot of flowers. Very peaceful, lovely garden. And she had a lot of architecture like this. It's a very large garden. So this was on a garden tour in Little Rock when I went to that International Master Gardener meeting. And the thing about this bench compared to the bench I showed you before, the better feng shui, is you see there's a backing there. That whole bench is kind of surrounded and just makes you feel more safe and secure. More Irish gardens.
My door told the story there.
Yeah. This is a living wall. And Powell Gardens has the largest living wall, I think, in the United States. But it's an example of how you can take a brick wall or a rock wall, and you know, a lot of you have sea walls or retaining walls, but if you can just get some soil up in there, you can plant succulents, different things, and they're called living walls. Now, the only bad thing about these is the snakes. I'm gonna look at them too. This is Powell Gardens again, I think, and you just have the repetitive. You've got your soft, no edging. And again, you know, so many times we want a water feature and we say, well, I can't afford one. But, you know, you can make a water feature out of a big pot or a barrel. So you can have a very, if you don't have electricity, you can, you know, you can still have a water feature. So don't get just, I have a friend who had a hot tub on her deck and she got tired of it as a hot tub. So she made it into a water feature, fish pond. And she's got all kinds of things and she just overwinters it and doesn't even look like a hot tub anymore. This is a succulent wreath. And I know in the past we've made these in Master Gardener. I don't know if you've done that for a long time. Basically, you just take a wire base and put peat moss in there and then fill it with succulents and you just spray it. I've seen these online to buy and they're about $150. But you can make one. And in the winter, just cover it up with mulch, spray it, and it'll overwinter and you can use it again. This was at Powell Gardens, but it's really, and again, get on Pinterest if you're interested. This is something, if you live in apartments, you could have it on your deck. They're really cool. Huh? Mm-hmm.
Is that at the chapel where they have a little pond by the chapel?
Yes, I believe that's right. Yep. This is another garden that was on this is a house in Eldon, actually, Victorian house. This water feature, this little statue and this little bird bath was original from the house. So it was very old. But one of the things with feng shui is you have what's called a bright hall. And a bright hall is you always want to have some kind of a water feature at your door. It's just welcoming. And if you can't have a water feature, the next best thing is to have a, they call sun ball. What do you call those balls? Reflecting balls. Gazing balls, yeah. Is to have a gazing ball because that creates the same feeling as water. But just, you know, I have a little bird bath with a little statue in it, right, as you come in my front door. So, and that's what this has is, but that's an example of what's called bright hall. Another barrel, rain barrel. This is a garden. You know, I've driven by this garden, Winnie, and it's gone. We worked so hard in that garden. You probably worked in it too. And I think the lady died. I think
No,
is
she's
she-
still alive, but she's in good health, and her husband is also.
this was a wonderful garden. And when I was in the garden club, I mean, we worked hard to get this garden up because she was starting to get in poor health then. It's outside of Eldon going on, is that CC, I think. But this pagoda there was taken from the front porch. This was a century farm, it was a 100-year-old farm. And this pagoda was built from the front porch of the original house. So it was really cool. So it was 100 years old. Again, more Ireland. And again, they just, you know, it is, see the crepe myrtle there, and the hydrangeas are just breathtaking. Specimen tree, know where that is? The White House, right? Some huge trees of the White House. Okay, so that's it. Just some ideas. I hope you can walk away with one or two ideas that you can put to use. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very, very,
And I'm
very
sorry,
much.
well-
I appreciate it. That was very informative. We'll take a few minutes and everybody kind of stand up and stretch a little bit. Lisa says thank you. All right, we'll pause that. And let's bring this down here. I know that. Okay. All right. See, I closed that. Well, thanks very much, Sue. That was an excellent presentation. All right. Okay, so that is fine. Make sure I open that. Should stop recording too.